You talk about examples of unfinished business that gets carried in as baggage into relationships. Describe for people what you mean by this unfinished business that people drag into relationships.
Yeah. So a good example is that woman I was talking about from the book, Charlotte, who keeps dating these men who are unreliable, who are not willing to commit, who, always leave her kind of feeling on edge. She never knows sort of what the status of the relationship is or what's happening. Um, they make her feel like really great one moment and really horrible another moment. And that's exactly what happened with her father growing up. He would be really present and really there. And then he would kind of, be absent and disappear and forget things like birthdays. And so she was really replicating this. We call this repetition compulsion. That's a term in psychology, which is that, people keep repeating a pattern from childhood because there's this unconscious desire to win this time. I'm going to, and by the way, when I say unconscious, it's completely outside of their awareness. So when we pick a partner, if we have unfinished business, we have radar for those people who are going to hurt us in exactly the same way that somebody from the past has hurt us. But we don't think that. But our unconscious says, oh, you look familiar. Come closer.
Yeah.
And our conscious mind is like, oh, that person is nothing like my parents. So it's so funny. There's that big disconnect. And then once they get into relationship with that person, they start to say, oh, wow, I've seen this before. I've experienced this before. This really is familiar. And it isn't until they can do that thing of walking around the bars, right? Which is really sort of processing the trauma, working on grief, working on loss, working on, really understanding that they are not that trapped child anymore. And being able to move to a different place, that they start to attract different people and they start to be attracted to different people.
It's so profound that you say that. I see so many people that come here for one reason. I find other things that are so outcome determinative in their lives. And one of the biggest examples is I'll have couples on that are really fighting. Maybe it's even gotten to the point of domestic violence, et cetera. And so often, tragically, I find that a woman in a relationship as a child was molested by a family member, a father, a brother, an uncle, a grandfather, or whatever. Maybe it was from 5 to 7, and again from 11 to 13. And when I asked them, did you report this? Yes, I told my mother, and she did A, B, C, or D. What did you do to heal those wounds? What did you do to deal with that trauma? And the answer 9 out of 10 times is nothing.
Mm-hmm.
They just continued to live with it for the next 20 years, and they come here with those open wounds still affecting who they are, and it's played out in terms of promiscuity, rebellion, anger, etc., all the ways that it can play out. But they've never dealt with that trauma, that violation. And that has a profound effect that cuts across virtually every relationship and every area of their functioning in life. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely. We see this so much I have this podcast called Dear Therapist, and we do a session with somebody. And so often we see people come on and they think that what they experienced as a child is not relevant to what they're experiencing now. Why bring that up? It's already taken care of. And they don't realize that, first of all, they have a lot of feelings about it still because they haven't processed it. And I think the other thing is that when we don't speak those feelings, when we don't work through those feelings, they come out in other ways. We think that we kind of numb ourselves, right? We think like, I'm not going to feel that feeling, or I've dealt with it before. And so what they're actually doing is they're kind of squashing it down, but it comes out in all the ways you just said in the case of of sexual abuse. It'll come out in maybe promiscuity. It'll come out in fear of intimacy. It'll come out in picking inappropriate partners. It'll come out in all kinds of ways. In day-to-day life, what we see with people who didn't deal with feelings is, sadness or anxiety or whatever, too much food, too much alcohol, insomnia, difficulty in relationships, irritability. That's how your feelings are coming out when you're not talking about them. So numbness isn't the absence of feelings. Numbness is a sense of being overwhelmed by too many feelings that we feel like we can't even talk about them. And then they come out in all of these behaviors instead. And I should say too, when we talk about healing and a lot of times when we don't talk about our feelings, we have this unconscious desire for our partners to heal us. Like, oh, I found my person, and that person's going to heal all of these wounds from childhood because they love me in a way that I wasn't loved as a child. Maybe my parents loved me as a child, but they didn't know how to love. And so all these things happen. But this person knows how to love. No, that person is not going to heal you, no matter how emotionally present they are. They will not heal you. Only you are going to be able to heal you. And if you go into a relationship thinking the other person is going to heal you, that relationship is going to have a lot of problems.
Yeah, it's above their pay grade. They're not equipped to even lead you to discover those answers yourself. And some of the things are not intuitively obvious. I see women sometimes that are morbidly obese, they lose weight, and as they start to get towards their goal, it's kind of the approach avoidance conflict. They start to become attractive to men and they start getting that attention that they don't want. And so they start to put the weight back on to hide. It's kind of like they're zipped up in a parka. And when they take it off, they start getting anxiety because they're getting unwanted attention and they don't realize that. Another subtle thing I see oftentimes is, particularly if it's happening to them when they're like 11, 12, or 13, as much as they don't want that, there are times that they'll say, I actually enjoyed it for a few minutes and have felt guilty my whole life because of that. And so they blame themselves for it. And so they've lived with guilt all that time. And they've never said that to anyone. It's so terrible that they live with those things inside because they don't come out from behind those bars and ask for some help.
There are so many ways that children, when they are abused, but under the guise of love, get very confused about what healthy love looks like. And until they start talking about it, until they start unpacking that, they will remain confused about that. And I want to say too that I think that it's not just women who are confused. When they've had difficult childhoods, I think that men come in so often and they will say to me, I've never told anyone this before. And they literally mean they have not told a soul, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be sexual abuse, it could be anything. Women will come in and they'll say, I've never told anyone this before, except for my mother, my sister, my best friend, right?
Yeah.
So they've told maybe like 1, 2, 3 people. There's such stigma in our culture around men and vulnerability.
Right.
And it really hurts relationships, and it hurts individuals, but it also hurts the people who love them and the people that want to be loved. And I see that when I see couples. So, let's say I have a couple come in and the woman often says to the man, I really want you to open up to me. I really want you to be vulnerable with me. I feel like there's this lack of connection here. Please open up to me. And then he does. And then maybe he sheds a tear. And then maybe he really starts crying. Inevitably, she will look at me like a deer in headlights, like, oh my gosh, he's crying. What do I do with this, right? So she asked for it. She said, I want to be emotionally close with you. But then we have a lot of trouble in our culture around men being vulnerable. Somehow, all of a sudden, it's a double-edged sword. It's like, I don't feel safe when you don't open up to me, but I don't feel safe when you're breaking down and crying. Well, what's he supposed to do? He can't win, right? And so
Exactly.
I think that we need to make it okay for everybody to be vulnerable, to share their truth, and to create a compassionate, warm, safe space for them in which to do it. That is how we heal.